Stepmother steals and sells my late mother's $20,000 engagement ring to pay for her spoiled daughter. My mother was an incredible woman. She came from a wealthy and respected family and was the kindest, most generous person I've ever known. When she married my father, her parents gave her a stunning engagement ring that had been in our family for generations. It was worth a lot of money, around $20,000, but to me its true value was sentimental. My mother loved that ring. And after she passed away, it became the only tangible memory I had left of her. When my mother passed, I was 16. My father, devastated by her death and struggling financially, sold almost everything she owned, including her jewelry and other valuable items, to keep us afloat. The only thing he kept, because I begged him not to sell it, was her engagement ring. That ring was my connection to her. Was the one piece of her I felt I could still hold on to. A few years after my mother's death, my father remarried. I'll call his new wife Margaret. From the very beginning I could tell Margaret and I were not going to get along. She was manipulative, vain, and entitled, and she had no respect for the fact that the house used to belong to my mother. She moved in with her daughter Stephanie, who was the textbook definition of spoiled and entitled. Stephanie never worked a day in her life, always demanded the best of everything, and threw tantrums when she didn't get her way. Margaret and Stephanie treated my dad like an ATM. Margaret had no problem spending his limited resources on designer clothes, fancy vacations, and other luxuries, while ignoring the fact that he was still financially recovering from my mother's passing. Anytime I brought up my concerns about how they were treating him, or me for that matter, my father brushed it off. He seemed desperate to keep Margaret happy no matter the cost. Fast forward to now. Stephanie recently got engaged and Margaret immediately started planning the wedding of the century. The problem: they didn't have the money for the lavish event Stephanie demanded. My father certainly couldn't afford it, and Margaret had no savings of her own. Surprise! I thought they might finally scale back their extravagant lifestyle, but of course they didn't. A few weeks ago I noticed that my mother's engagement ring was missing. It had always been kept in a small locked box in my room, which only I had the key to. Panic set in immediately because I knew I hadn't moved it. I tore my room apart, looking for it, but couldn't find it anywhere. When I asked my father and Margaret if they had seen it, Margaret acted offended while my father just avoided eye contact and mumbled something about misplacing things. A few days later I overheard a phone conversation Margaret was having with a friend, boasting about how she had come up with the perfect solution to fund Stephanie's wedding. Made my heart sink. I confronted her directly, and after some back and forth she finally admitted it. She had stolen my mother's engagement ring, sold it to a jeweler, and used the money to pay for the wedding. She even tried to justify it, the ring, saying it was just sitting there collecting dust and Stephanie's wedding is more important than a piece of jewelry. I was livid. This ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was the last memory I had of my mother. I told Margaret she had no right to touch it, let alone sell it, and demanded she get it back immediately. She laughed in my face and said, "It's gone now, get over it." I went to my father expecting him to back me up, but instead he defended Margaret. He said they needed the money, and that it wasn't that big of a deal. I couldn't believe it. My own father was siding with the woman who stole from me to fund her daughter's vanity. At that point I realized I couldn't rely on him to make this right. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the police and reported the ring as stolen. I provided proof of ownership, including old photos of my mother wearing the ring and a written appraisal document my mother had kept. The police took my report seriously and an investigation was launched. When the police showed up at our house to question Margaret, all broke loose. Margaret called me every name in the book, accusing me of ruining Stephanie's big day. My father was furious, saying I had blown things out of proportion and that I was tearing the family apart. He demanded that I drop the charges immediately, warning me that if I didn't he would kick me out of the house. I stood my ground. I told him that Margaret had stolen from me, and that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I also reminded him that he had already sold almost everything else that belonged to my mother and that this ring was the only piece of her I had left. His response: "I had to sell those things to provide for you." Margaret did what she had to do to provide for Stephanie. It's the same thing? It's not the same thing. My mother's belongings were sold out of necessity during a time of financial crisis. Margaret sold the ring out of greed to find an over-the-top wedding. I told him as much, but he refused to listen. Now I'm being treated like the villain in my own home. Margaret is playing the victim, crying about how I'm trying to destroy her family, while Stephanie is furious that I've ruined her wedding because I'm jealous as I'm single, and my father won't even look at me. He's fully on their side and is now to kick me out unless I drop the charges. I thought long and hard about this, and I refused to drop the charges. That ring was priceless to me, not just because of its monetary value but because of what it represented. It was a connection to my mother, the one thing I had left of her after everything else was sold. Margaret and Stephanie had no right to take that from me. I don't care if my father kicks me out. I'd rather be homeless than continue to live under the same roof as people who have no respect for me or my mother's memory. I'm standing my ground even though it feels like the entire world is against. Am I the a-hole for reading it? Refusing to drop the charges against my stepmother for and selling my late mother's engagement ring, or should I just let it go to keep the peace? Opie's stepmother stole the priceless heirloom and sold it without any remorse. The fact that Opie's father's defending her is disgusting. Opie is absolutely right to stand her ground. If Opie's father kicks Op out, it might actually be a blessing in disguise. Op doesn't need to stay in such a toxic environment. I hope the police can help Opie recover the ring, but even if they don't, Opie is doing the right thing by holding her accountable. And now let's hear the community's opinion. Your stepmother and stepsister sounds like absolute nightmares. It's one thing to ask for help or sacrifices in times of real need, but this was pure greed. They didn't need a lavish wedding, they chose to prioritize that over your feelings and your mother's memory and your father enabling this behavior. Honestly, I think it's time to start looking for an escape. Plan you're not the a-hole, but staying in that house is only going to hurt you. More, not only are you not the a-hole, but you're also incredibly brave for standing up to your stepmother and father. It's heartbreaking that your father is so blinded by his new wife and stepdaughter that he's willing to sacrifice his relationship with you to stay strong. You deserve better than this. Your stepmother's justification it was just collecting dust is appalling. That ring wasn't hers to touch, let alone sell. And your father comparing this to selling your mother's belongings out of necessity is absolutely not the same thing. Stick to your guns. OP. You're fighting for your mother's memory, and that's worth everything, not the a-hole. My 31-year-old female ex-husband, 31 male, and I split up about a year ago when he left me for Amy, 32, female. It turns out he and Amy had been having an affair for months, and when she got pregnant, he decided that he wanted to be with her for the past year. My ex and I have only interacted when it comes to co-parenting our daughter. Because of my daughter, I have tried to be civil to him and Amy, but I am still angry at both of them. About the affair anyway, I was at my ex and Amy's house a few days ago to pick up my daughter, and Amy and I were hanging out in the kitchen with the new baby. I was just waiting for my daughter to grab some things from her room when the baby started crying, and Amy asked me to hand her the bottle on the counter. I kind of laughed a little bit and told, "There's no way I'm helping you with this, baby." She looked at me funny, but it wasn't a big deal or anything. Later I told my sister about what happened at Amy's house and how she had the audacity to ask me for help with the baby after she cheated with my husband. My sister kind of freaked out and told me I was for not doing a simple favor for a new mom. I agreed that if it was anyone other than Amy, I would have totally handed her the bottle, but I am not friends with Amy, and I don't owe her any politeness. So who is right, me or my sister? Am I the a-hole for not helping Amy with the baby? Not the a-hole. Baby wasn't in danger or need. Amy wasn't completely overwhelmed and distraught. It just would have made things slightly easier for her. Was it pretty sure? But it's a harmless petty. So go for it, and kudos to you for being mature and graceful where it counts. Not many people can put the kids first and at least keep it civil in front of them. Not the a-hole. And if Amy says something, I would be petty and say, well, hopefully the next married man you sleep with has a nicer wife. Not the a-hole. Let me see if I understand correctly. She got into a relationship with a married man, got pregnant, caused a divorce, and wants you to help with anything in the future, though I'd be less chummy with her if you want to avoid any appearance of wanting to be her friend. Don't be an a-hole about it, but make the interactions with her purely transactional in nature. I, 35, female, married my husband, 56 male 5 years ago, and his family has been awful to me and our son, 7 male, because I was the other woman. His ex-wife dragged him through a 2-year-long contentious divorce and got the house, pretty much everything he owned except his business, and an exorbitant amount of child support. They had 3 children together. Junior, 24 male, Eve, 22, female, and Kate, 16, female. The older 2 do not acknowledge me. Kate is not rude because she generally stays with us every other weekend, but she will not talk to me if she can avoid it. Our 7-year-old Brady has cerebral palsy and is nonverbal and non-mobile, so they use that as an excuse to not develop a relationship with him at all. My husband was very close with Junior before we got together, and they used to do typical father-son things. After his parents' divorce, Junior grew distant and went away to college, and my son will never be able to do the bonding things my husband wants. Eve is engaged and stated that she does not want my husband to walk her down the aisle because he doesn't respect the covenants of marriage. She's also made it clear I'm not invited to the wedding of my husband's parents, and sister are religious and do not approve of the adultery or the divorce or my having his child out of wedlock. When my father-in-law passed, he left his other grandchildren 6-figure inheritances on top of their college funds and left my son and husband just enough that we wouldn't contest the will. We recently found out that the family does Zoom nights and excludes us. We recently had an argument about his family and how they treat my son is less than equal. I said that I'm done with them and his children. I'm tired of watching my husband's heartbreak, and I want him to stop begging his family to forgive him for a choice we made to be happy together. My husband said I was an a-hole, and he can't just give up his kids to make me happy. So am I the a-hole? Yes, the a-hole. I'm honestly only sorry for your son. You and hubby dearest deserve every bit of the vital coming your way. Your husband cheated on his wife and you were a knowing participant in the ruination of a marriage. I want him to stop begging his family to forgive him for a choice we made to be happy together. Have you ever apologized for your role in breaking apart your husband's children's family? Has he? I see a whole lot of wrongdoing from both of you, but not 1 ounce of contrition. Pretty hard to forgive someone who isn't remotely sorry. Yes, the a-hole. I'm not sure why you think you're entitled to any sort of warm and fuzzy hug treatment from his children and ex-wife when you are, as you say, the other woman I wouldn't invite you to my wedding either. On the other hand, it's pretty wretched for your son's grandparents to treat him poorly. He's an innocent in all of this, but they're a minority in the story, so I'm not putting down everyone's. Here, I know the title is bad, but please hear me out. Here's some context. I, 19 female, started a job in early 2021 and had an okay work experience. I never faced any serious problems until around late August. I lost my father due to liver failure and needed some time to recover. He was the only parent figure I had. I decided to call off work for 2 weeks to mourn my father's passing and learn to accept that he was gone. I asked my boss, who will call Shirley, that because I was at a really low mental state, I could miss a few weeks of work. Shirley told me she understood what it was like. She herself lost her baby about a month before, and she said she would take me off the schedule for 2 weeks due to personal reasons. Fast forward about a week later, on my personal break, I get a call from an unknown number. Usually I don't get that many phone calls, so I answered. The only thing I heard for the first few seconds was incoherent whispers. I asked who I was talking to, and sure enough, it was Shirley, belligerent on the side of the road needing a ride. I was quick to leave my home and pick her up because I felt like I owed her something. I left around 9:30 p.m., and as soon as she got into my car, Shirley immediately brought up her failing marriage and confessed to being unfaithful to her husband that night. I was uncomfortable talking about this, and I suggested a change in topic by asking why she used an unknown number. Shirley told me her phone died and that she used a payphone. It was silent after I dropped her off, and when I got home it was already 1:45 a.m. As I pee into my driveway, I realized I was 180 miles before I left and had 38 miles until empty. When I got home, I decided to call her tomorrow when she was sober in the late afternoon, being 7:30 p.m. I called my boss when it rang, and she answered. I asked her if she remembered last night. She told me she blacked out, so no. I told her she called me last night asking me for a ride, and I told her that I needed gas money to compensate. She denied I ever picked her up and that I made it up because I just wanted money out of spite. I brought up her husband, telling her I knew she had an affair and that it probably wasn't worth getting blackout and ruining her marriage. Shirley made an offhanded gasp and said, "Just because you lost your father to drinking doesn't mean it's an excuse to be a witch to everyone else and intrude on people's privacy." At that point, I had enough of her and calmly told her that I was glad she wouldn't have any children because she would be the reason they wouldn't get anywhere in life. I hung up the phone and put in my 3 notice. The day after, my coworkers all reached out to me and cussed me out for saying such a horrible thing to Shirley. After I quit, and even after I tried to explain my side of the story, they didn't believe me. Some coworkers still harass me today because of it. I personally don't feel bad, so am I the a-hole? Not the a-hole. You are 19 years old and had to pick up your boss who was. Then listen to her drunken confessions, and all you asked for was a few bucks for gas instead of gas money. She gaslit you, insulted your father, who recently passed, and then spread rumors. 100% not the a-hole in my opinion, just some context. Me and my dear old dad hasn't had a good relationship ever since I was a kid. I picked up on the fact that he resented me. This kind of fed into my suspicions. I was adopted. He was never physically aggressive, but was absolutely emotionally aggressive to me as a kid. I have 2 sisters, one older 28, and one younger, 22, and my dad is. I was always extremely loving to them. Jealous and hated my sisters for it until I was like 22. I and them have since reconciled and now have relationships. Me and my dad didn't find some common understanding until like last year. And still he is very withholding. He's never once hugged me. He hasn't said he loves me in nearly 20 years. Every time I went to him for advice, he'd berate me. He has told me on multiple occasions that I am a regrettable stain on our family. Honestly, I just wanted to cut him out of my life. But he and my mother are still together. And my mom wants me to have a better relationship with him. She was the one I went to after my dad hurt me. She was extremely loving and compassionate to me. She always told me that my dad was trying to show me how to be a man. I got everyone in my family at my place Saturday so I could make my discovery known to the whole family. I told them I knew I was adopted, and my mom started crying. My dad then said, "You're not adopted, you're just not mine." Me and my sisters just sat there with mouths agape. I asked what that was supposed to mean. According to my dad, my mom ducked one of her coworkers for a few months in 1993 and got knocked up with me when she got pregnant. She ended the affair and just hoped it'd be my dad's. When I was 3, my mom shacked back up with my busted dad and was caught red-handed. They got a DNA test on me and my older sister and a prenatal paternity test on my younger sister when my mom found out she was pregnant again. I'm the only one that wasn't his. Upon learning, I was so enraged at my mom and her husband, I yelled at them for making me find this out when I was 26 and not younger. I yelled at my dad saying, "Why the duck? Would you stay in my life and show me so much hate?" I couldn't help it. I'm not the W who couldn't keep her legs closed, and gestured at my mom. She began weeping and begged her husband to leave. They left. And it was just me and my sisters. My baby sister was still crying and was at my mom and dad, while my sister was mad at me. She told me I was being dramatic and wanting to put on a whole show, then called me a monster for speaking to my mother that way. I said she was being a W, and my sister went off on me for shaming our mom. They both eventually left, not before my older sister told me I was a massive and needed to apologize. Am I the a-hole? Not the a-hole. What does anyone expect when your dad treated you like he did for all these years? Then you find out why I'd probably have paid for a spot on the local news to announce it. Essentially, you've been punished your whole life for her indiscretion, and not only did they not tell you about your actual origins, your family allowed your dad to treat you differently. You should tell your sister to mind her own business. You were the one who was treated like, for years, by a man you thought was your father because of something your mother did. I have no sympathy for her. This won't be popular, but not the a-hole. You were in fact an a-hole to your mom. But it's pretty understandable. Your father is a raging a-hole who should have manned up and either been a father to you or just left your mom While it's clear she loves you, was too spineless to stand up to him and get you a father figure. You're entitled to one massive outburst if you simply must have another directed at dad. Now go talk to a therapist, preferably with your mom, and try to remember that she at least loves. I am 24 years old and the oldest child. In a family of 4, me, my mother, and stepfather and my sister J17 female. I am a product of air, and I knew it since I was 6 or 7 years old. I had a normal childhood. At least I had a bed to sleep on and food to eat, and I was not beaten by a drunken father when I was 7. My mother and her husband had a baby girl Jay. She became a favorite one in the family. My mother loved her because she was a girl. Her husband because she was of his own. Yes, all those ideologies are still strong in my country. Our family wasn't poor, and Jay got all the best toys, parties, education. I went to a local public school, Jay to the private institution. She had birthdays in the equestrian club. I never had a birthday party in my life. Same with the tech. The only devices were a laptop and a phone. Gifts from my grand. On my 12th birthday, Jay had her own room with a gaming console and wall-mounted TV. The same goes for vacations, free time, and many more. At 15 I left home and started living with my grandmas, and my part-time work managed to help me with my hobby I had since I was 9, aviation and engineering. I graduated and got a scholarship in a not very bad university. Now I am an aircraft engineer. My childhood dream, and slowly started my own life. My parents were never heard from since I left them until yesterday. My mother called me and asked us to meet and talk together. I asked why. She said she wanted to restore our relationship. Her as a parent, mine as a child. The answer was, I never had a good childhood with her as a parent, and if she wants to become a good parent for me, she can start with giving me things I was deprived in my childhood, like a TV or gaming console, or even money covering my basic needs like transportation. I still don't have a car because I can't afford it. She called me a greedy a-hole and hung up the phone. I just don't know who of us is right. Am I the a-hole? Make it clear, aircraft engineers, especially with a little experience, aren't getting paid very well in my country. I am still struggling to pay my own bills, and I have literally zero free money, especially after the virus. No amount of material goods will ever make up for the way they let you down. Trust me, frankly, I would just walk away. They will all be empty gestures, and none of it will ever fill the hole they left in your life. Live your life as you have been without them, not the a-hole. It seems less about the material goods themselves and more about the idea that your mom and both parents need to make up for how they treated you in the past. You're rightfully hurt, and it makes sense that you would want to see her be more apologetic than she is. Not the a-hole, but whatever they might give you won't ever be enough. We'll never make up for them treating you the way they did. Just continue your no-contact policy and go about your life as if they died in a tragic accident long ago and are now just a distant memory.